Hello and welcome to this field tutorial. Today we're going to have a look at MMFeedbacks in particular and the MMFeedbacks component. I'm in a scene right now that I created in a previous tutorial. You could work in any scene if you want to follow along. All you'll need basically is have like one cube floating in space. That should be enough. So to start things off, I'm going to create a new empty object. I'm going to call it test feedbacks. And I'm going to add an MMFeedbacks component to it. This component is core, of course, to the MMFeedback system. That's what's going to let me add feedback, modify them, reorganize them, play them. We've seen how to play them previously. We can do that via code using just like basically one line via Unity events and also via the debug controls that are here. That's how we're going to do it today. I'm going to add a few feedbacks. First one is going to be a sound feedback. I'm going to pick one of the sound effects I have here. Let's say this note. Let's test it. It works. It's fine. I'm just going to make sure my play method is cached. Afterwards, I'm going to add a position feedback. And I'm going to target my big cube here. I'm going to say I want to move along a curve on the y-axis, and I'm going to modify the base curve, the default one, to go something like this, maybe over 0.5 seconds. If I were to press play now, and so play in the editor, and then the green play button on my MMFeedbacks, you can see that when I play, both of my feedbacks play at once. So if I minify them and just press play, you can see we've got these nice progress bars. And these progress bars, they of course show you the progress of each feedback. At the bottom, we have one that lasts for 0.5 seconds. That's basically the duration that I have here. And the sound, the system will automatically grabs the duration of the sound effect you've specified. So, in this case, it's almost 2 seconds. We're going to go and add a few more because that way that will give us enough feedbacks to play with and sequence and pause. So we need a bit more. Maybe we're going to go with a scale one, going with the simple ones. And let's say maybe 0.4 seconds. And we're going to go from a scale of 1 to a scale of 2, but maybe just on the, let's say, y-axis. If I play that, it's interesting. We'll keep it. After that, maybe a post-process lens distortion. So in that scene, I already have a post-processing volume and I already have shakers, so I know it's going to work. Otherwise, for pretty much every post-processing related feedbacks, I would have to add on my volume a shaker like that. But this is already done. I'm going to go with the default values here, just double check. It's still working. It is still working. Maybe I'm going to make it, let's say 50, so that it shows a bit more. What else? We've got a light in our scene. Actually got more than one. And I'm going to go and grab that point light here and add a light feedback. And let's see what the default settings do. If I play only that, yeah. So it bursts the intensity, range, and shadow strength of the light. Sure, we could tweak it, but for today's purposes, it's way enough. And maybe let's add one last one, something that would show. Maybe a rotation one. So I'm gonna go with the hero again. And we're gonna say we are gonna rotate on its y-axis only by 360 degrees. It's maybe a bit too fast. Let's say 0.5. Let's make it 1.5. Yeah, still too much. Yeah, that's better. So we're gonna go with 1.5 and 90. So now if I play everything, so I'm not sure what's happening. It doesn't have much sense, but we have some feedbacks and we can play with them now and start tweaking and rearranging them. So that's a good start. So the great thing with MMFeedbacks is that it gives us access to a lot of settings. Right here we have our global settings that will impact the entire MMFeedbacks component. So that's the entire list of feedbacks. And for each feedback, of course, we will have a number of settings that are specific to, let's say, the sound, and a number of settings that are common to all. So, chance, label, timing. We'll get back to these later on. So first, let's go over the global settings. You'll find them by unfolding that settings foldout. First, you'll have the safe mode. By default, it's on full. Leave it like that unless you know exactly what you're doing. That's performing a bunch of sanity checks every time you initialize a feedback. It costs pretty much nothing. Just make sure that the system is set up correctly. Init mode. By default, it's on start. You can change it for awake if you want, or script. If you are in script mode, that means that you have to, via code, manually initialize to online the feedback. That can be useful if you're maybe instantiating things at runtime and you know exactly when you want initialization to happen. That's an option. You can check autoplay on start, in which case, when you start your scene, the feedback will play. As you can see, on that computer, at least I get like some form of freeze frame on start. That's usually why I don't play anything on start. Then we have autoplay on enable, in which case you want to make sure that your init mode is awake, so that awake runs before on enable. So when it arrives to on enable, initialization has been done. What this does, as you expect, it plays on enable. The cool thing is I can disable my MMFeedbacks, enable it again, and it will play. So that's another way you can play feedbacks, by simply having them on disabled objects, set up like I just shown you, and every time you enable them, boom, it plays the feedback. So that can be useful. What else? We have direction, something we will come back to later on, but basically feedbacks, they play from top to bottom if you have pauses or loops in them. Right now, all of these, they execute at the same time. They're on the same level. We'll get back to direction later on. Then we have the intensity. So that's one way. I'm going to press play. So the feedback's intensity is a global way. All right, it's still on enable. Intensity, yeah, that's a way to modulate the strength of each individual feedback. That's a design decision to determine what exactly is the intensity of that feedback. But let's say for position scale, that's usually gonna change the scale, the destination scale. So for example, if I make it twice as intense, you can see that all of the feedbacks are much more boom. Right, much more reaching. And if I go with half the intensity, you can hear maybe that the sound volume is only cut by half. The scale is much smaller now. Of course, some of these settings, they don't just scale perfectly, but you can modulate things like that. You can check what exactly that feedback intensity drives by looking at the documentation for each feedback. And we also have a duration multiplier that also lets us impact the speed at which things happen. So for example, if I want everything to happen twice as fast, twice as slow, it's a duration multiplier. So now everything takes twice the time. if I want things to happen twice as fast, I would go with 0.5. And you can see that all the twins, all the animations, even the post-processing effects, they happen twice as fast. The sound, for example, is an exception. It doesn't play twice as fast. It would usually not be something you would desire. Haptics also will escape that rule. And after that, we have full duration details. So that's something, once you have more advanced timing settings, I'm just going to do a quick change here. Let's say I have an initial delay of 1. I have 2 repeats and a 0.5 delay between repeats. You can see here it computes like the total duration of all that. I could decide to check that checkbox here. It displays the entire equation. Just going to roll back these changes. We have the cooldown duration. Nice feature that lets me play a feedback, and then if I'm trying to play again, and it will wait for the 3 seconds to have passed. That's like a gating mechanism you can add on the MMFeedbacks directly. Usually I would recommend to have it on your gameplay logic, but that could be a nice way to prevent 2 sounds from playing at once on the same frame, or one frame and the next, stuff like that. And then there is the initial delay. I can set it to 1, for example. Actually gonna exit play mode for that. The initial delay, you want to make sure you set it outside of play mode. It gets cached for performance. So now if I press play, I get this 1 second delay, right? I'm gonna revert it back to 0. And to conclude our global settings, we have the feedbacks debug control at the bottom, which are global and control the entire MMFeedbacks. They are not to be confused with the play and stop buttons that are here, which of course will impact only that sound feedback, for example. The initialize one, it will call the initialization method. So an example of that, I put myself in script mode. That means I don't have auto initialization. I press play, I get errors telling me, well, you haven't initialized your thing. I then press initialize, press play again. Now it works. Gonna revert it back to start. Then I have the play button. We've done it already. Stop, reset, revert. These would be useful if we had more than just one level of feedbacks playing. We'll see that later on. And the debug view, it lets you see the inner workings, components of the feedbacks. Don't mess with that unless you know what you're doing. All right, now it's time to have a look at feedback settings. So individual feedback settings. We have a bunch of them that are common to all feedbacks. So here, for example, starting with light and everything that is below it, that's dedicated to light. That's unique to the light feedback. But what's above, you can see that script active label chance timing, script active label chance timing, you'll find that in every feedback. So what do they do? First, there's script. So script, it lets you locate the actual script that controls that specific feedback. Can be useful if you want to modify it, for example, or just look at how it works. Note that they are all commented entirely. So, if you have questions, usually the answer is in the code. Then we have the active one. So, of course, what it does is it disables the entire feedback from playing. If I disable the light and play my feedbacks, you can see the light doesn't play. If I turn it on again, the light plays. What else? We have the label. Purely something for you to keep things organized. That could be, I don't know, my point light, and you can see reflected directly here in the title. Super useful if you want to have more than one sound playing, maybe. Plenty of cases where I just rename everything. You'll notice here, by the way, that they are all color-coded, and that corresponds to their category. So if you were to add more, I don't know, more post-processing, you'll find that they are all yellow. Can be a nice way also to organize. not sure if I mentioned it, but you can, of course, reposition them by clicking and dragging the 3 tiny lines here. The order doesn't matter until you have pauses, until you have loops. So right now I don't. So they all play at the same level. The order doesn't really matter. Moving on, we have the chance. So that's an interesting one. If I am to press play, right now all of my feedbacks, they have 100% chance to play. If I were to lower the chance of the light playing, let's say I put it at 10, and I play all my feedbacks. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Well, I'm extremely unlucky. There we go. So it took, what, 20 tries, but it's random, right? So it's not going to be like exactly 1 every 10 things. But if you were to play it 1,000 times, you would get closer to the actual probabilities. Maybe it gets cached. Does it? Maybe it does. If I put at 50%, should be, yeah, this didn't work, this didn't work, this worked. Okay, so that's pretty much 50%, right? So that's something you can use to add some variety to your feedbacks. And then we have the timing options. So the first one, timescale mode. This will determine whether or not your feedback can run on scaled time or unscaled time. If it's unscaled, it will play whatever the current timescale value is. If you've paused the game, if you are in slowdown mode, it still plays as expected. In scaled mode, it will follow the speed of the timescale. Then we have initial delay. So I'm on my point light. I'm going to add an initial delay of 2 and press play. So now if I press play, the light activates 2 seconds after the rest of the feedbacks. I can also have it repeat. I can have a cooldown. So the cooldown is exactly the same as the global one, but that would be just for the light. Let's say you don't want to have your light bulb explode. That could be useful. Number of repeats, I'm going to say 3 repeats and maybe a 0.5 seconds between 2 repeats just of that light. So expected 2 seconds delay, then 3 repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's the initial one plus 3 repeats, with every time a delay of 0.5 between the repeats. After that, we have the play direction. So this one can get tricky to understand. It's definitely not the easiest concept here, but basically feedbacks, they can play from top to bottom, and you can decide, or bottom to top, the entire list. And you can decide that you want this feedback to play only when the MMFeedbacks is played forwards, only when it's played backwards, and you can also decide that it will impact its play direction. We'll get back to that in a later tutorial, I think. The intensity, so we've seen that we can modulate the intensity at the global level, but if for some reason you want, let's say, your point light to always behave the same regardless of the intensity, you can just check that. And you can also use intensity intervals. So let's say you want your light to only play if the intensity is above 0.5 and below 1. What this will do is that I'm gonna press play here. So I've set it to work only between 0.5 and 1. I'm gonna change the intensity to, well, I'm gonna keep it at 1, press play. It doesn't play. which is interesting, right? Oh, that's the delays. All right. Let's, okay. Reset the delays, set the repeat, do it again. So I have a global intensity of 1. I press play, doesn't do anything. Okay, I think it's exclusive. So you want to make sure that it's it's not equal. It has to be more than, is it? Yeah, okay, that's how it works. Oh, I just coded that, ignore this. But let's say now my global intensity is 0.1. You can see that all the feedbacks play, but the point light one. Even at, let's say, 0.4, they don't play, but at 0.6, we'll see all light. Yes. Okay, just know that the bounds are exclusive. I had forgotten about that, sorry. What else? We have the sequence. So that depends on the sequence system. That's a completely different thing and not something that is going to be covered in this tutorial. But that pretty much covers all of the settings, global and individual, you have to know to work with MMFeedbacks. So now that you are armed with this knowledge, you should be able to interact with pretty much every feedback out there. They all work the same. You'll find these same settings everywhere. And it really comes down after that to just learning the different feedbacks, what they do, and how to tweak them. Note that we have these tooltips all the time for you to learn more. There's a complete documentation that explains everything there is to know about each and every feedback. And if you have questions, of course, there's the support form for you to ask questions. There's also a Discord you can join if you want. And yeah, that's pretty much it for today. I hope you learned something new today, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.